I drove up the old gravel road expecting silence. 47 acres had always meant quiet. Wind combing pine needles, creek water whispering over stone, and a cabin that smelled of cedar, oil, and thyme. Instead, the road opened onto a shock, so sudden it felt like a physical blow. Where my grandfather's workshop once stood, there were houses, 196 of them, new, uniform, gleaming. White fences cut the land into obedient squares. Children rode bikes in careful loops around a place called Heritage Circle. A community pool sparkled exactly where Grandpa kept his table sore. Families grilled burgers on land my family had owned for more than 80 years. I stopped the truck and sat there, hands on the wheel, listening to the wrong sounds. Not birds. Not wind. Vac units hummed in chorus. Lawn mowers droned like mechanical heartbeats. The air smelled of chemicals and charcoal instead of honeysuckle and damp soil. This was suburbia, fully grown, planted on my inheritance like a flag driven into conquered ground. Then the white Escalade arrived. It rolled up my gravel drive with the confidence of a tank, tires crunching stones my grandfather had laid by hand in 1944. Out stepped the HOA president, blonde hair lacquered into submission, designer athleisure tight and spotless, perfume strong enough to announce her presence from 15 feet away. Claudette Peaton introduced herself as if she were stepping onto a red carpet, not trespassing on family land. "Your structure violates multiple covenants," she said, thrusting a business card at me, thick as a poker chip. "You're trespassing on common area. Fix it to code or we condemn it. You have 30 days. She called my grandfather's cabin, a solid, hand-built foundation from 1943, a recreational vehicle. She rattled off violations from a clipboard like a grocery list written by someone in the middle of a breakdown. Non-conforming structure. Unauthorized occupancy. Landscaping violations. Failure to submit architectural plans. 47 separate fines for a cabin older than rock and roll. I told her the truth. My family had owned this land since 1943. She smiled with all teeth and no warmth. Millbrook Estates, she said, had legally purchased the entire property in 1994. If I believed otherwise, I should contact their legal department immediately. Most people would have run inside, grabbed the deed, and shoved it in her face. I had the original document in my truck. But something stopped me. Maybe 40 years in construction teaches you to measure twice. Maybe it was my grandfather's voice. When you're in a hole, stop digging. "I'll look into it," I said. That was the wrong answer. Or maybe the perfect one. Within days, the harassment began. Code enforcement appeared with the regularity of a metronome, Claudette riding shotgun, smiling while citations stacked up. I was fined for replacing a porch light without permits, for using a hand-dug well from 1944, for not producing septic records for a system installed before permits existed. Each fine was small. Together, they were meant to bleed me dry. Instead of fighting, I paid. I documented everything. Before that campaign crushed me, I drove to the county courthouse. The basement records room smelled like floor wax and old paper, a mausoleum of property histories. I asked for the chain of title. What I found made my hands shake. There was no recorded sale after 1943. According to official records, my grandfather still owned every inch of those 47 acres. Buried deeper was the poison. A corrective deed from March 15, 1994, transferring 23 acres to Millbrook Development LLC for $1 and other valuable considerations. It carried my grandfather's signature. That signature was impossible. In March of 1994, Tobias Whitfield was in the hospital, dying of pneumonia. I'd watched him struggle to lift a cup of water, his hands shaking so badly he couldn't sign a birthday card. Someone had forged his name while he lay dying, then built a fortune on that crime for 30 years. I didn't scream. I didn't call the sheriff. Years of dealing with insurance companies taught me that rushing without proof only helps the liar. I copied everything, $6 worth of evidence that would become the foundation of a case. Then I went quiet. Back home, Claudette escalated. Retroactive HOA dues arrived, $847 a month, plus administrative fees, plus threats of foreclosure on land she didn't own. I opened a separate bank account and paid every bogus charge. Each payment was a paper trail. Each demand was a confession waiting to be read in court. The harassment turned physical. Utility accidents cut my internet. Water pressure vanished during maintenance. Mail delivery stopped because my gravel road, functional since 1943, was suddenly unsafe. Surveyors arrived with measuring tape and fake court orders, driving stakes into my yard. I filmed everything, because the documents felt wrong. Too clean, too fresh, still warm from the printer. Then they came with chainsaws. An HOA crew cut my boundary trees, oaks and maples older than electricity, claiming they were diseased. What Claudette didn't understand was that those trees were landmarks from Grandpa's original survey. She wasn't just destroying privacy, she was destroying evidence. And in doing so, she was creating a criminal record. That night, she knocked on my door with wine and a smile, offering $150,000 for a quitclaim deed. Pocket change for land worth millions. I told her I'd think about it. I didn't sleep. At 3 a.m., I went to Grandpa's old tool shed, the one thing she hadn't touched. Under a top, I found his surveying crate. Compass. Measuring chain. Field notes. I spread them across the workbench and compared them to the forged deed. My heart started to race. That fraudulent document transferred only 23 acres. I still legally own 24, including the clubhouse, the pool, and 76 houses full of families who had no idea they were living on stolen land. For the first time since the Escalade rolled in, I smiled. Because Claudette thought she was hunting me. In reality, she was digging her own grave. By morning, the land looked like it had survived a small war. Stumps stood where ancient trees once filtered sunlight into green columns. Sawdust lay thick as snow, the smell of fresh-cut oak mixing with diesel fumes and anger. But when the light hit the ground just right, I could see what Claudette had accidentally revealed. Sight lines opening toward the back of the subdivision, exposing heavy machinery parked in precise rows. Concrete mixers. Steel beams. Foundations marked for dozens more houses. Even a second pool, tennis courts, maybe a shopping strip. All of it on land that, by law, had never stopped being Whitfield property. That night, the tool shed gave up its secrets. Grandpa's field notes weren't sentimental ramblings, they were weapons. Every boundary, every natural marker, creek bends, lightning-split oaks, twin maples, documented with a precision that made modern shortcuts look like jokes. The forged deed Claudette leaned on so confidently had one fatal flaw. It carved away only 23 acres. The rest, 24 acres of prime development land, was still mine, including the heart of Millbrook Estates. I didn't celebrate. I prepared. First call went to Harold Jameson, retired county surveyor, and one of the last men who'd worked with my grandfather before honesty went out of style in local government. Harold listened in silence as I explained the forged signature, the missing acreage, the harassment. Then he said the words I needed to hear. If Tobias set those markers, they are still there. And if they are still there, this ends in your favor. By sunrise, Harold was on my land with GPS equipment that cost more than my cabin. What Grandpa had mapped by hand in 1943, Harold confirmed within inches. When his metal detector screamed near the clubhouse, we dug 6 feet down and struck concrete. Carved deep into the marker were the letters TWW 1943. My grandfather's signature, written in stone beneath 8 years of landscaping lies. That was the smoking gun. But a single bullet doesn't win a war. I needed timing, witnesses, and patience. I filed a quiet title action. Quiet in name only. The filing forced anyone claiming ownership to prove it in court. I timed it perfectly, 24 hours before the annual HOA meeting. By evening, panic spread through Millbrook Estates faster than gossip at a church potluck. Homeowners got notices hinting their property titles might be compromised. Mortgages. Insurance. Resale values. Suddenly, Claudette's kingdom was shaking. Her response was immediate and vicious. Nashville lawyers flooded the county courthouse, calling me unstable, dangerous, delusional. Anonymous flyers appeared on windshields, warning residents about a violent squatter. Security checkpoints went up at subdivision entrances. Guards questioned anyone who visited me. Even pizza delivery required interrogation. Then she went after my livelihood. Clients cancelled projects. 3 contracts disappeared in a week after whispers circulated about my violent tendencies and legal instability. Fake websites popped up with my license number, my photo, and fabricated reviews accusing me of fraud and harassment. My phone stopped ringing. 20 years of reputation burned down by lies typed in air-conditioned rooms. I documented everything. IP addresses. Language patterns. Timestamps. Every threat, every fake report, every conveniently anonymous accusation. Claudette wasn't hiding anymore, she was panicking. And panic makes sloppy criminals. County inspectors showed up daily, citing me for firewood placement, composting, squeaky boards. That's when I learned her brother-in-law had just become chief building inspector. The corruption wasn't a theory anymore, it had a family tree. Donations tied her lawyers to county commissioners. Banks underwriting the subdivision had long-standing relationships with Millbrook Development. This wasn't an HOA gone mad, it was organized theft wearing suburban camouflage. She even tried to have me arrested for collecting my mail. When that failed, she filed for a restraining order, claiming I'd threatened her life. Witnesses swore they'd seen it, despite being in Florida at the time. Security footage proved I'd been at a lumber yard miles away. The order collapsed in court, but not before doing what it was meant to do: delay me, isolate me, paint me as dangerous. Then came the news. Channel 7 ran a primetime segment portraying me as a suburban nightmare, edited footage turning me into a stalker, a menace, a threat to children. They never called me. Never checked records. Never asked why a squatter had lived there peacefully while a subdivision mysteriously grew around him. The backlash was instant. Death threats. Vandalism. People crossing the street to avoid me. Claudette thought she'd won. What she didn't know was that while she burned bridges, I was building allies. Betty Calvin, a retired accountant, brought HOA financials riddled with unexplained legal expenses. Marcus Rodriguez, a contractor, provided photos of construction shortcuts that violated codes from day one. Jennifer Walsh produced water tests showing contamination tied to illegal development practices. Each one had questioned Claudette before and been silenced. Now they had proof. Together, we assembled something stronger than anger: a case. By the time the HOA meeting approached, Claudette had committed enough felonies to qualify for a federal indictment. Forgery. Fraud. Extortion. Harassment. Destruction of evidence. She kept escalating because she believed authority was power, volume was truth, and intimidation was the same thing as ownership. She never understood the difference between someone reacting and someone recording. The clubhouse, built squarely on Whitfield land, was set for 7 p.m. The place where she'd ruled by clipboard and fear was about to become a courtroom. Harold had the GPS. I had boxes of evidence. And the residents, whether they knew it yet or not, were finally going to learn the truth. Claudette walked toward that meeting believing she was about to silence a problem. Instead, she was walking into the end of everything she'd stolen. Because the land remembers. And so do the people who refuse to let lies stand unchallenged. By the time I pulled into the clubhouse parking lot, the place already felt like a funeral disguised as a meeting. Cars lined Heritage Circle bumper to bumper, headlights cutting through dusk like nervous eyes. People stood in small knots, whispering, checking phones, holding envelopes they barely understood but deeply feared. Mortgage notices. Court filings. Words like quiet title and fraudulent documentation had ripped through Millbrook estates overnight, and nobody knew who to trust anymore. Harold arrived beside me in his ancient pickup, unloading GPS equipment that looked more at home on a NASA launchpad than at an HOA meeting. Betty Calvin waved from across the lot, face tight but determined. Marcus Rodriguez carried a thick folder of photos. Jennifer Walsh hovered near the entrance, holding lab reports like a shield. None of us said much. There was nothing left to rehearse. The clubhouse buzzed with tension. Folding chairs faced a podium draped in fake authority. Coffee percolated in the corner, the smell mixing with anxiety and vanilla air freshener desperately trying to hide rot. Residents filled the room fast. Families who thought they'd bought certainty now sensed they'd purchased a question mark. Then Claudette arrived. She entered like royalty, powder blue suit crisp, chin high, flanked by 3 Nashville lawyers and a uniformed security guard built like a refrigerator. She smiled, but it was the brittle kind, the smile of someone clinging to a story that had already begun to crack. She opened with practiced confidence. Before routine business, she announced, we must address the ongoing security threat posed by an individual who refuses to respect legal boundaries. The screen behind her lit up. My face appeared next to fake police reports, forged psychiatric evaluations, carefully edited stills pulled from security footage. She narrated each slide like a prosecutor who'd never met the concept of truth. I was unstable. Dangerous. A squatter attempting extortion. A risk to families and children. People shifted uncomfortably. Some believed her. Some didn't. But fear has weight, and she'd been piling it on for weeks. That's when I stood. I'd like to address those claims, I said, voice steady, using real evidence. The room fell silent. Claudette snapped toward me. You are not a member in good standing. You need to leave immediately. Before I could respond, Harold stood up beside me. This young man owns the land this building sits on, he said calmly. And I can prove it. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Claudette's lawyers leaned forward, whispering urgently. She laughed once, sharp and brittle. These documents are fabricated, she said. Created by a mentally unstable man. I opened the first box and laid out the original 1943 survey, Grandpa's field notes, and the forged 1994 corrective deed. Harold activated the GPS unit, its screen glowing with coordinates that didn't lie. I surveyed this property with Tobias Whitfield, Harold said. These measurements confirm, this clubhouse was built on land that never legally changed hands. Betty Calvin stood next. If that's true, she said slowly, then we've been paying HOA fees on property the association never owned. Marcus followed, raising photos of foundation shortcuts and mismatched permits. Jennifer stepped forward with water contamination results tied directly to illegal development. The lie was cracking from every side now. Claudette slammed her hand on the podium. This is harassment. I have court orders. You mean these? I interrupted, holding up the fake court documents alongside authentic versions from the same agencies. Fonts mismatched. Seals wrong. Paper quality cheap. Even the air seemed to recognize fraud when it saw it. Then Harold walked to the decorative fountain. He turned on the metal detector. It screamed. The sound cut through the room like a siren. Harold grabbed a shovel. 6 inches down, concrete emerged. He brushed soil away slowly, deliberately. Letters appeared. TWW, 1943. The crowd gasped. Phones came out. Someone swore under their breath. Others stared like they'd just watched a magic trick performed by the dead. That marker was buried proof, literal stone, carved by a man who'd never sold his land. That's when the sheriff's deputy arrived. Claudette pointed at me, voice shaking now. His trespassing. His threatening this community. The deputy looked at the marker. The GPS. The documents. Then he looked back at her. He said evenly. If this is his land, then you're the one trespassing. The room exploded. Questions flew. Accusations followed. People demanded refunds, explanations, arrests. Claudette backed away from the podium, her confidence draining fast. For the first time, she looked small. Harold confirmed the boundaries live. 76 houses. The pool. The clubhouse. All on land that had never left Whitfield ownership. "Ladies and gentlemen," I said when the noise finally ebbed, "we need to talk about new management." After that, it was over. Federal agents moved fast. Within 48 hours, Claudette was arrested on charges that stacked higher than her HOA fines: property fraud, document forgery, bank fraud, conspiracy. Her computers were seized. Accounts frozen. The Escalade towed. Investigators learned she'd run similar scams across multiple counties. My case just happened to be the one documented well enough to crack everything open. I didn't evict families. They'd been victims too. Instead, we worked with the county to sell the homes to current residents at fair value, covering restitution and legal costs. The remaining land returned to Whitfield ownership. The clubhouse, once a throne, became common ground. But the real reckoning wasn't legal. It was personal. Claudette had believed authority meant power, volume meant truth, and paperwork meant ownership. She'd mistaken confidence for invincibility. What ended her wasn't rage or revenge. It was patience. Because lies can survive fear. They cannot survive records, witnesses, and time. The end did not come quietly. It never does when an empire built on paper lies finally collapses under its own weight. Within 48 hours of the HOA meeting, federal agents arrived with warrants thick enough to sink a desk. Claudette's computers were seized first, followed by bank records, email servers, shell corporations, and that white Escalade she'd used like a symbol of untouchable power. What started as a local property dispute exploded into a multi-county investigation. My case, they told me, wasn't unique. It was simply the most complete. The best documented. The hardest to deny. Her plea deal came fast once the reality of decades in federal prison set in. Property fraud. Forgery. Extortion. Bank fraud. Conspiracy. Crimes stacked so high, there was no bluff left to play. She returned every stolen parcel, surrendered every fraudulent claim, and disgorged the money she'd siphoned from families who thought they were paying legitimate dues. But justice isn't just punishment. Sometimes it's repair. I refused to evict homeowners who'd bought in good faith. They weren't thieves, they were targets. Working with the county and lenders, we converted chaos into resolution. The 76 houses built on my land were sold directly to their residents at fair market value. Titles were cleaned. Mortgages stabilized. The money covered restitution, legal costs, and damages without destroying families who'd already paid enough. The remaining 24 acres returned to the Whitfield name. The clubhouse. The main pool. The spring. Land my grandfather had measured by hand, reclaimed without firing a shot. With what remained of the settlement, I did the one thing that felt right. I built forward. The Tobias Whitfield Community Trust was born from the wreckage, funding scholarships for students entering trades, carpentry, surveying, electrical work, the honest crafts that build rather than extract. Grandpa's old workshop site became a living exhibit of craftsmanship, filled with his tools, his photos, and reminders that things made to last always outlive people who chase shortcuts. The spring was restored into a public park. Trails cut gently through regrown woods. Signs told the story, not of betrayal, but of stewardship. Of land cared for across generations. Millbrook Estates didn't disappear. It changed. Betty Calvin became HOA treasurer and opened every ledger. Marcus Rodriguez led real maintenance, not harassment. Jennifer Walsh oversaw environmental oversight so water would never be treated as disposable again. Even Harold taught monthly seminars on property rights, ensuring nobody in that community could ever be fooled the same way twice. As for me, my construction business came back stronger than before. Word travels when someone stands his ground without losing his soul. Clients didn't see a troublemaker anymore. They saw a man who documented, waited, and won the right way. Some mornings, I still sit on the porch with coffee, watching sunlight touch land that almost slipped away. The machines are gone now. The fences don't feel hostile. Birds returned first. Then neighbors. Conversations replaced whispers. I think about how easily this could have gone another way. One angry confrontation. One shouted threat. One moment where frustration replaced patience. That's what Claudette counted on. That's what systems like hers depend on. People reacting instead of recording. But power built on lies always demands more lies to survive. Louder ones. Riskier ones. And every lie leaves a fingerprint. Grandpa used to say something simple. Truth doesn't need volume. It just needs time. He was right. Because sometimes the strongest thing you can do isn't fighting back fast. It's standing still long enough to let the lie collapse under its own weight.